With India's growth rate projected to touch the 8% mark, there are clear signs that going forward, the state of the economy, at least at the macro level, is very positive. We've got a new government in power right now. The big question is whether there'll be enough which is actually being done to ensure that the path towards growth continues. We're joined by a very special guest at this stage, the CII President, Mr. Sanjiv Puri. Thanks so very much for being with us. How important is it as a new government comes to power in India for the incomplete or the unfinished reform agenda to carry on at the same pace?
Thank you, Vishnu, first of all, for having me on the show. And I think it's certainly very, very important for the reform pace to continue because, to continue growing at that 8% rate, there are lots of opportunities, but the enablers in terms of the next set of reforms need to come up. Of course, one must acknowledge that tremendous policy instruments have happened over the several years that have laid a solid foundation. But the next set of the journey must go on. So the next set of reforms are extremely critical, and there are important reforms that today fall at the intersection of center and state. The difficult ones like land, labor, agriculture, power. Even this whole aspect of fiscal sustainability, I think that is a very, very important area of reform that must progress. The work on ease and cost of doing business, where tremendous progress has been made in the past, I think those should continue. We've been seeing the focus on education and health in the past, but given India's demographic advantage, there is, and to really take advantage of it, there's need to scale that up. So what we are suggesting is a roadmap for education to achieve about a 6% of GDP and healthcare to achieve about 3%, and a lot more impetus on skill building. You see, the available data suggests that about 5% of skills in India have gone through the formal system. That number is much higher in developed economies. And we could take a target of 25% by 2030. Of course, it is possible that the actual number is higher because there may be some, skilling that is done by various private agency which is not captured in it. But overall, the data seems to suggest that, and the experience on the ground is that's an area that needs to be ramped up for sure. Then I think there is also very important to
Mr. Puri, private sector investment is an area which is obviously something which India needs to do much better. If we look at India's growth story over the last couple of years, there's been a great deal of public sector funding. But if you look at private sector funding of generating or pushing the India growth story, do you believe that really needs to be a priority?
It needs to be, but I want to just make a quick point on the last question. That is that I think just like the PLI has worked well, we need to also look at now heavy employment intensive sectors and like garments, toys, the sectors like tourism, retail, media, and so on and so forth. So there CII is also suggesting an employment linked scheme with outcome metrics. That's one area I believe that there's tremendous opportunity. Now coming back to your question on private capex, I think the private capex is very much on a good trajectory. As it stands for 22-23, the private capex as a percentage of GDP stands at 23.8. It is higher than the pre-COVID number, and in fact, if we look at it structurally in the economy, of the fixed capital formation, the share of private sector has not reduced. It is in the same magnitude that it has been, and the trajectory of private capex is certainly improving year on year. And given the enablers in place, plus the expectation of further reforms, I think this will only go forward in a positive trajectory. And let me also add that investment is happening across a range of sectors. There are the sectors that have been enabled through PLI. There are energy transition, there is automobiles, there is logistics, there is hospitality, there is food processing, semiconductor, industries indexed to infrastructure. So many areas we are seeing investment come in.
Mr. Puri, I find it really interesting that, while you point out that India is one of the youngest countries in the world in terms of our demographic, it is critical for quality employment and the generation at scale, which is important. Nobody ever talks about quality of employment, and that is so critical, that young people need to, get jobs in places where they want to work, where they are valued. When one talks about using India's demographic dividend, how is quality of workplaces critical?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's the reason why, on one hand, we are suggesting that we have to work collectively to provide impetus to the labor-intensive sectors, which will also be an opportunity as globally, supply chains are diversifying. Of course, there's a demand compression in some parts of the world today, but then it will at some point of time in the near future come back. So those are sectors that we must provide impetus to. Second is that on the technology side, which provides good quality of services, I think that's also a tremendous opportunity. We are seeing the amount of GCCs come in. And right now there are some, because of the stress in the global economy, the investments also are limited on digital. But the whole world is moving towards digital. It's a matter of time when that is going to pick up. AI is another opportunity. And the other part also is around improving the quality of incomes in agriculture. That is equally important. So many areas where there are very clearly opportunities.
Just a final question. India's green economy is obviously something that's important. The green transition, I should mention, is something that is important. In terms of generating jobs, or your broader outlook in terms of how India's growth story will be driven by a transition to renewables and to green, is there any data or anything that you can share with us?
Oh, it's very important. It's becoming a very important competitive issue, because these are issues that are coming up in trade, and therefore as we integrate with global value chains, I think these are important areas. So definitely we need to make sectoral roadmaps, look at the just transition roadmaps, because there are also social costs associated with the transition. It's extremely important, and towards that I think what is important is also to look at how the green financing would be dealt with, because the resources required are enormous. There are also areas where the technology pathways are nascent or not fully discovered. And that's the area where, it's the positive news is that the government has already set up many missions in this area. So we need to work together to develop technology that is economically viable, so that, once it's economically viable, private capital will come in. And then we need to also set in place the right market, maybe the carbon markets with the right incentives and disincentives to promote green transition. And any frictions that are there, and this is true today particularly at the last mile at the state level, though the central rules are very, very progressive, but at the state levels there are frictions. So if those are removed, again it will unlock private capital. And in addition to that, the other issue which I also we spoke about earlier is that, given that the temperatures are only going to rise for quite a long time before they start coming down, extreme weather events will multiply. So we also need to focus on the bit on and resource adaptation in a much more rigorous manner, and CII is also recommending the formation of a national adaptation mission.